Welcome to the Wellness Roundtable, a new podcast created by the Global Wellness Institute. This is Season 1, Longevity, and I'm your host, Alexia Brue, an exited media founder turned longevity entrepreneur. Together, we'll explore the scientific and societal frenzy around all things longevity, examining whether it's a golden age or a gold rush. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our partner, Fountain Life, for supporting this podcast. When was the last time you really thought about your health before something went wrong? We're living in an age where science and technology have unlocked the ability to detect disease before it shows symptoms and take action when it matters most. That's the foundation of Fountain Life, a visionary longevity center co-founded by Tony Robbins, Peter Diamandis, and Dr. Bill Kapp. They've brought together some of the world's most advanced minds in medicine to flip the healthcare model from reactive to proactive. Fountain Life is redefining what it means to take control of your health using AI-powered multimodal diagnostics that go far beyond the standard checkup and inform a personalized optimization plan designed to maximize your vitality and extend your health span. Fountain Life has been a trusted partner of the Global Wellness Institute for many years, and we share the common mission to empower health and wellness worldwide through proactive medicine, scientific innovation, and technology. This is the future of healthcare, and you don't have to wait for it. So choose to live without limits. Head to fountainlife.com to learn more. That's fountainlife.com, because a healthy person has 100 dreams, but a sick person has only one. Welcome back to the Wellness Roundtable. I'm your host, Alexia Brue. Today, we're diving into one of the most promising and misunderstood frontiers of longevity, regenerative medicine. My guest is Dr. Adeel Khan, a Canadian physician at the forefront of cell and gene therapies, whose work is reshaping how we treat aging and chronic disease. If terms like stem cells, epigenetic reprogramming, and plasmapheresis sound familiar but fuzzy, you're not alone. Dr. Khan breaks down the science with clarity and candor, no biology degree required. We cover a lot of ground. What makes Muse cells so promising in stem cell therapy? Why the US is lagging behind Asia in regulating and improving cutting-edge regenerative treatments? How subtractive medicine, literally removing toxins and microplastics from the body, may soon become as critical to longevity as what we put in. And yes, we also talk Brian Johnson, GLP-1s, and how Dr. Khan is working to make these therapies more accessible through his practice, Eterna.health, which has offices in Dubai, Los Cabos, Toronto, and Tokyo. Dr. Khan is one of those rare physicians who combines clinical rigor, entrepreneurial vision, and a relentless curiosity about what it means to heal at the cellular level. Whether you're a wellness professional trying to make sense of regenerative medicine, or just someone looking for what's next in the pursuit of health span, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. Good morning, Dr. Khan. Thanks so much for joining me on the Wellness Roundtable.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Khan, I'm really excited for you to share your knowledge and experience in regenerative medicine. But let's start with your background. How did you decide to pursue medicine, and specifically, what drew you into the field of regenerative medicine?
Yeah, long story short, it was a very simple, I want to help people. And you always think being a doctor is the best way to help people when you're a kid. So that's the path I took. But as I went into medicine, I realized that we're just treating the symptoms and not the root cause. And the reason I had that perspective was because I was working as a personal trainer. And you can see people with exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress. You do the lifestyle stuff and you realize, hey, I can actually help a lot of people reverse their type 2 diabetes or their high blood pressure. And yet in medical school, we had pretty much no teaching on that. So it just seemed a little odd. And then there's my family members, including my mom, who had chronic diseases, and I just saw how the system wasn't really solving any of their problems. So that's what led me to integrative and functional medicine and down that rabbit hole. And then to me, regenerative medicine was just a progression of what functional medicine has built on, which is getting to the root cellular reason as to why we have the problem in the first place.
So this field of regenerative medicine is multifaceted. It's pretty complicated for outsiders. And so I'd love for you to take viewers and listeners through what they need to know, particularly as it relates to longevity. So I guess we could start with, what is regenerative medicine?
Yeah, at a very simple level, it's trying to restore the body or repair tissue back to a previous state. So basically, if something's broken, you're trying to make it work again instead of taking a pill to mask that broken issue or using surgery to cut out that broken issue, which is obviously the traditional model. And if you think about it like that, it's like, why didn't we always do that? It's just because we didn't have the understanding of the human body to really get down to the core reason as to why disease happens. But now we do. And because of that, we can actually restore cellular signaling and make the body work as a system. And that's the whole idea of regenerative medicine, is we're just trying to restore function to cells.
You have a more advanced toolkit than a functional medicine doctor. Talk us through that toolkit.
Yeah. So what is the toolkit of regenerative medicine? It's cell therapy, gene therapy, tissue engineering, and combining these all together for the next generation of therapies. So stem cells are probably the most popular thing, and we can dive into that. And then gene therapy is a very broad term for editing your genes. And there's exciting technologies like CRISPR, which is almost like using scissors to cut out DNA. And there's even more specific ones now called prime gene editing, where they can cut out a single nucleotide, which is basically the coding of your DNA. So these things are getting very specific and accurate and evolving. It's almost upgrading your hardware and upgrading your software at the same time. So imagine you can make your body like a computer, and now you can manipulate it and reprogram it to the way that you want. We're not fully there yet, but we're getting there. And that's the promise of regenerative medicine.
Should we start with cell therapy and stem cells and all of the confusion and nuance there?
Yes, for sure. I think most people, when they think of stem cells, they usually think of babies, I think. And so when they think of babies, I think a lot of it comes to the Bush era and embryonic stem cells, where they think aborted fetuses. But of course, that's unethical. And there's risk with those stem cells because those stem cells can turn into tumors. At a very basic level, a stem cell is just a repair guy in your body. Think of him like the ultimate carpenter who can fix different problems in your body. But as you get older, the repair guy gets tired. And so what this means is they can't do their job as effectively, and they can't repair tissue that's becoming damaged. And what is tissue damage? It's basically what causes aging, which is accumulation of damage of nuclear and mitochondrial DNA. But basically, your body makes this damage over time. Their job is to fix that damage. But when you make them work too much, they eventually go on strike. And this is called stem cell exhaustion. This is one of the hallmarks of aging. So, of course, if you think about it at a very simple level, like, hey, if I had more fix-it guys in my body, then maybe I could make my body younger. So stem cells have been a very hot area of research for decades. But it's really only in the last 10 years that it's gotten more sophisticated for us to understand exactly how these cells work and what they do in the body. The problem is with most stem cells, when we put them in the body, most of them die. And a lot of them, we can't control them to behave the way we want.
And when you're talking about stem cells, you're talking about like someone's own stem cells?
Yeah. So you can get donor stem cells, or you can get them from your own body. And that's the interesting thing is, we used to think that getting them from your own body was the safest, but it turns out your own stem cells, especially after age 40, start expressing markers of inflammation. And after age 50 or 60, they can even have markers of cancer. And so for that reason, the stem cells that we're using and the stem cells that are the most popular are from umbilical cord tissue. So after C-section birth, the cord that's connected from the placenta, from the mom to the baby, that actually has a very rich source of stem cells. And we're isolating what's called a subpopulation from those umbilical cord stem cells, which are called the Muse cells, MUSE. And this is the exciting part of regenerative medicine right now, because we're standardizing cell therapy. So it becomes more like a drug where you have a reproducible population. Because the problem is with stem cells is that your stem cells are different from my stem cells or from a different donor stem cells. There's no standardization. And that lack of standardization is what leads to lack of reproducible results, which is why this stuff hasn't become mainstream. But now we're entering the era of standardized cell therapy, and that can reproduce consistent results. And that's what's going to ultimately lead to regulatory approval and insurance companies and all that stuff, the mainstream buy-in, so to speak. So we're just at that inflection point right now. I think the only thing I would add for the cell therapy is that you can do what's called the regenerative medicine triad: cells, signals, scaffolds. So cells, stem cells, signals, they're the growth factors and the signaling molecules these stem cells release. And scaffolds are structures to help support and keep them where we want to keep them, because these cells like to migrate. So if you inject them into a knee for someone who has arthritis in the knee, they're not going to all stay there. In fact, within 24 hours, only 2% of them will remain. So what we do is use a scaffold, which is essentially collagen, but it forms like that jello-like substance around the stem cells. So then it stays where it's supposed to, and then it slowly releases and repairs and regenerates the tissue. And there's customized scaffolds that are being developed for different cell therapy. So now you're combining scaffolds with cell therapy, and you're really getting remarkable results.
Where is all this research coming out of?
Yeah, I'm doing a ton of research. We're working with different biotech companies and developing different products, and working on doing some clinical trials as well. But a lot of the research, I would say, is coming out of Japan. China is actually a leader in tissue engineering, and then Korea as well. And the US and Canada also have great scientists and produce a lot of great work. But unfortunately, their regulatory bodies are behind. So these treatments aren't allowed, but these treatments are allowed in other countries in Asia. So that's why there's that disconnect. And that has a lot to do with politics, which we don't necessarily have to go into. But the point is, these therapies are very safe and can be very effective, but unfortunately you do have to travel for them, just because you can't do them in US and Canada at the present moment. But that's changing very quickly, especially with RFK and the new administration. I think there's a good chance stem cells will become permitted this year in Florida. So things are evolving.
Oh, interesting. I would love to get your thoughts on why there's been so much reluctance in the US. And I've heard you talk elsewhere, and there are a lot of doctors that are talking about stem cells that aren't really stem cells. It's a bit of a wild west, and we have seen some abuse. And so I would love to hear from you, like in the US and Canada and other nations that are trailing behind, what needs to happen for this to gain legitimacy?
Yeah, I think what you said is exactly the problem. It's like a gold rush, right? There's an opportunity to make money, and you get a lot of people who just unfortunately prey on patients and just take advantage of lack of education. And they claim certain things are stem cells when they're not. So for example, the most common thing in the US is they'll take your own fat or your bone marrow, and then they'll say, yeah, we're doing stem cells. But those are not stem cells. When you take your fat or your bone marrow, you need to isolate the stem cell and you need to culture and expand it, which means you have to grow them. And that process is illegal in the US as of today. But you are allowed to take someone's fat or bone marrow and inject it back in. But those are not stem cells. The correct term, it's called committed progenitor cell. It's not a true stem cell. It can't turn into different cells in the body, but it can reduce inflammation and help with healing. So it can still be helpful in certain contexts, but it's just a misnomer. So that's part of the confusion in the US right now. And then you, of course, have doctors who are doing them without FDA approval. And of course, there's a huge black market. And then that unfortunately makes regenerative medicine doctors look even worse, because then the mainstream doctors are like, hey, look at all these doctors breaking the rules. They're doing these things that they shouldn't be doing. And that's part of the reason I moved to Dubai, is because we can do this therapies here. And that's why we practice in Mexico as well. But I want to follow the rules because I want to make this mainstream. And the only way to do that is to show them the power of this and how it can change people's lives, and get the funding to do those large clinical trials to then get the regulatory bodies to approve it.
Great. I think that's a good segue to talk about your entrepreneurial journey and Eterna, which is this global medical practice that you started in 2023. So can you share a little bit more about what Eterna is and your long-term vision for it?
Yeah, my vision for this company is to make regenerative medicine accessible and having doctors counsel their patients on these options. So, for example, instead of saying, hey, your only option is taking this drug or getting this surgery, there may be another option for you to try before surgery. And so Eterna is a company that I started to help change the narrative on legitimizing regenerative medicine by doing it to the highest standards and focusing on patient outcomes, really trying to make people better, as opposed to a lot of these clinics, which is just really focused on profits. And so we invest money back into research too for that reason, and we're developing different products. I was the first doctor to talk about these mu stem cells. And the reason I was the first one is because these stem cell clinics were just happy making money with the old stem cell, even though they weren't that effective. And I keep looking because I'm very curious and I just want my patients to get better. And that's how I found out about the mu cells. And now the results are so much better. And now we have a product and I can really feel confident in what I'm doing.
Talk to us a little bit about like where you have offices and how many doctors there are and the types of therapies that you're offering at Eterna.
Yeah, so we have a clinic in Toronto. We can't do stem cells, but we can still do something called plasma injections, which is where we take your blood, we spin it, we concentrate it, and that plasma has platelets. And that can still be helpful for acute sports injuries. And we do have certain things that we can do there.
Just to talk about PRP for a second, my husband had it. It wasn't very effective. And I've heard you speak about how a lot of people are doing PRP, but not in the right way. So I'm just guessing there are listeners that have maybe not had effective experiences with PRP. And maybe you can just touch on why that is.
Yeah, it's the same problem. It's lack of standardization because, again, your PRP is going to be very different from my PRP, right? We're different ages, our body's been through different things, and therefore you can't standardize the concentration of platelets and what you're injecting. So there's different processes that can try to standardize the PRP a little bit so that you have a better cytokine profile, which are the signals that reduce inflammation and the growth factors in the PRP. So at least you're trying to standardize it so you get more consistent results.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Talk us through your other clinics.
So Cabo and then Dubai, and then we have a partnership in Lithuania and Tokyo as well. And those clinics, we can offer stem cell treatments. And one big thing we're focusing on is something called subtractive medicine, as the name suggests, taking stuff out of your body. So the column that they use to filter out blood cleaning has evolved a lot. So this plasma is called plasmapheresis, which is basically cleaning your blood. And now the technology has really evolved and it can be used for longevity. For example, there's this company we're working with called Clarify, and it can remove microplastics, toxins, heavy metals, all these things that build up in our body over time and hijack our immune system to a certain extent, because we know like chronic infections and these toxins can play a role in autoimmune conditions. And then you can lower the toxic burden in the body. So you take out the bad and then you add in the good, which is the stem cells.
Interesting. And so is that sort of a longevity treatment?
You can use it for so many different chronic diseases because the underlying chronic diseases are all governed by similar, what are called hallmarks of aging. There's 12 hallmarks of aging, whether it's Alzheimer's disease or type 2 diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis, they all have very similar underlying drivers. And so if you treat the underlying cause, let's say at a very high level is immune dysfunction and chronic inflammation and mitochondria not working well, then you can actually restore the system because the body is a system. It's not a fragmented body parts. If you have some sort of chronic disease going on in your brain, for example, it's all connected. It's connected to your gut. Even Parkinson's disease has been linked to gut dysbiosis, which is imbalance in the microbiome. So the point is you're trying to restore the body as a system and as a whole. And we can do that really effectively by doing this protocol of removing the bad stuff and putting in the good stuff.
Interesting. You know, we start to think about different clocks that people are using to measure age, whether it's Brian Johnson who's measuring the age of his individual organs. How does that tie in with your world and being able to regrow tissue?
Yeah, so we use something called Generation Lab, which is an epigenetic clock, and it basically measures biological noise, which is essentially the amount of mistakes your genes make over time. And it can give you 19 different organ systems. And then you can do a before and after you do the longevity treatments with us. When you can see, hey, I de-aged my body by 5 years, or my speed of aging has decreased by 20%. So then you're aging at a slower level than you were before you did the treatment. Of course, epigenetic clocks are not 100% accurate, but they're pretty good. And there is something called proteomics, which is basically mapping out all the proteins in your body. But you can have a pretty good gauge of how your body is aging based off proteomics. And so you can basically then really start to quantify these interventions and then eventually start making them personalized.
The epigenetic clock that you mentioned, is it available to consumers?
Yeah, it's called Generation Lab. I think it's like $499 and you can just order it through their website.
Interesting. I mean, there's so many of these too, and I know there's a lot of debate over which are accurate.
The reason I like this one is it has a lot of research behind it. It is Irina Conboy, who's an aging clock expert, but this technology of biological noise is called nonlinear regression because aging is a nonlinear process, right? You age faster at certain points. For example, at 60 to 70, you age a lot faster than you do from 20 to 30. So for me, that's one of the reasons I like this technology. And then the whole biological noise concept also makes sense to me too, which is the genes and really looking at how many mistakes they're making and the variance that they have over time.
So fascinating. Can you talk us through what a patient intake and treatment plan might look like at Eterna? I know you famously treated people like Tony Robbins, and a lot of world-class athletes have been really public about coming to you. You really are like the go-to expert and rock star in the space. So I know there's probably no typical patient, but just painting the picture of a couple of different types of patients and what your intake would look like and how you would develop a treatment plan for them.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what it's for. A lot of what we get is sports injuries or chronic pain. And chronic pain is relatively easy. I'm so confident on helping those patients now because I can look at their imaging. We use ultrasound or x-ray. We're very precise with our injections and we know what to inject, how much to inject, and we can get amazing results. And it's as easy as it sounds. It's just an injection and then maybe an IV at the same time of the mu cells, and we put them where the problem is. So for example, if you have a bummed out knee that's been bothering you for 20 years and you don't want to get a knee replacement, we can often help with that using the mu cells and the hydrogel scaffold, and we use an ultrasound to guide it. And it's based off imaging, and we just use image guidance. And so that's a bit more straightforward. But let's say for complex chronic illnesses, for example, like long COVID or people who have like mold or Lyme or these chronic diseases that the medical system doesn't have great solutions for. These are the patients that I find when you can help them, it's very transformative for their life. But the way we do it is we have to measure certain tests as well. One of my favorite tests is called lymphocyte map from Cyrex Labs. And that can basically give you a breakdown of the immune system cell by cell. So it can give you your Th17, your Treg ratio, your B cell, T cells, and then it can really give you insight into how the immune system is dysfunctional and then how to bring that back into balance, perhaps using peptides and lifestyle intervention first before doing the stem cells, getting the body optimized for it. Same thing with the test called red blood cell fatty acid lipid analysis, which is basically looking at your cell membrane health. And again, you're getting down to cell biology. So if it's the cell membranes, think of them like the security system. They're like the security system to determine what gets into your cells. So if your security system isn't working very well, then things get into your cell that shouldn't, and things go out of your cell that shouldn't. And then you get this dysregulation. And then that is one of the drivers of cell dysfunction. So restoring cell membrane health, it can be very important and pivotal. And one of those things that people just don't measure and then optimize their bodies before we do the stem cells.
Yeah. And in 10 years, Dr. Khan, what therapies or protocols do you think will be mainstream that seem like super fringy and experimental today?
I think gene therapy and gene editing, and in that context, specifically what's called cellular reprogramming or epigenetic reprogramming. So these are the Yamanaka factors. It's called OSKM. So these are the different names for the transcription factors, which were shown to reprogram cells. So again, this is like software. You're basically making your cells younger by overexpressing these transcription factors. You make the cell function as a younger cell. But the problem is if you overexpress these transcription factors too much, then the cell loses its identity. And so it can dedifferentiate. And then there's other potential risks with these cells too. Like we talked about, they can turn into tumors. It's called induced pluripotent stem cell, iPSC. But this epigenetic reprogramming in 10 years, I could see this being mainstream and being one of those things where it's just like, hey, I just got my body a software upgrade by reprogramming my cells. And I did this XYZ gene therapy to do that. There's some serious investment in this space. Sam Altman, the ChatGPT guy, has a company called Retro Sciences that's focusing on epigenetic reprogramming. And then there's a company called Altos Lab, which is funded by Jeff Bezos, which is focusing on this as well. And then there's another startup called Turnit Bio that's already starting to do this in human clinical trials. So there's billions of dollars being poured into this right now. So I can't not imagine there being huge breakthroughs in this area.
So what's the vision there that when we start to feel the hallmarks of aging, we would do this reprogramming and could feel 40 forever? Like, what's the vision?
Well, I think that's what Jeff Bezos wants. Yeah. some sort of immortality reprogramming technology. I don't think we're going to get quite there, but I do think realistically what we could have is some sort of technology that could extend lifespan and health span by another 50 years or maybe another 100 years of high quality of life. And I think that would still be a remarkable thing for society. But I think the ethical concerns around that are the disparities between the rich and the poor. Unfortunately, these treatments, even the treatments I do right now, are quite expensive. And you can imagine the epigenetic reprogramming stuff will be quite expensive too. And so it may only be available to the rich at the beginning, which creates a gap. Then this, like, the rich people get to live longer and healthier, and the people who don't have money don't. And we're already seeing that, right? There's something called social determinants of health. And so basically people who have lower socioeconomic status don't live as long and have more chronic diseases. And so this is already a public health issue that I ultimately think the technologies we're working on can eventually solve that problem because it can democratize health for society. But there's a lot of things that have to happen for that to take place.
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier the prices for a lot of these things will come down. But does that mean it needs to become part of healthcare? How do you see that happening?
Yeah, I always say economies of scale. So as there's more demand and there's more people doing it and there's more competition, that will obviously drive costs down. And then there's what I like to call the assembly line moment, which is that there's going to be innovation in manufacturing. And I know for a fact with new cells, this is on the precipice of this. There's going to be a process that will make them much cheaper to manufacture. And then you can have robotics as well, where you can automate the manufacturing. And then the cost of manufacturing goes down significantly. So then the cost to the doctor decreases, and now the cost to the patient decreases. Once these treatments become regulated in jurisdictions like the US, then I think there's obviously less risk involved for the doctor, and then they don't have to necessarily charge an arm and a leg as well. That's also part of it right now, because if you're a doctor doing this, you are taking more risk, obviously, and you have to do them in offshore jurisdictions, and there's a lot more costs that come with that.
And you mentioned retrobio. I think like with a lot of these, call them like billionaire moonshot age reversal companies, there is this big fear that it's going to create this dystopian future where a certain segment of the population gets access to these drugs that extend life and others don't. But then I've heard other people say, well, the whole point of them developing these drugs is so that everyone can use them, given like the population implosion that's coming, like age extension will almost be necessary given how far below replacement rate we now are. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on if you see it in this dystopian way, or you think like all of this will become broadly available.
I believe eventually this will, but there will be more than likely an area of maybe a few decades even where there is a huge gap between the wealthy and the people who don't have as much in terms of health. And you're already starting to see that a bit. Like, it's like the people, not to say that stem cells are a miracle, but I do have patients who've been doing stem cells for 20 years and they're in their 60s or 70s and they look great. You know what I mean? They look like they haven't aged as much as someone who hasn't been doing that stuff, but then they can afford to do these treatments every year and keep on top of it, you know? And so I'm always starting to see that just anecdotally in the real world. And I think that disparity is only going to magnify as more and more technologies are created. Now, to your point, one of the biggest problems right now is age-related diseases are putting a huge stress on the medical system because, of course, we have a growing aging population. So it's imperative to try to reverse some of these chronic diseases or aging associated diseases, which is really what these technologies are going to be able to do. And to me, that's exciting. It's called compression of morbidity, which means less chronic diseases and a less window where you're sick. So you have more health span. And I think that's amazing for society. And ultimately, that's what these technologies can do. The problem is just they're just too expensive. What I would like is the government to look at this and insurers to look at this, being like, hey, if we keep our population healthier for one extra year of productivity, do you want to take a guess as how much GDP that would increase the US?
It's massive. I don't know. What is it?
1 trillion. It's just such a big number. And I'm almost positive if we were to do a controlled study with even with the longevity stuff we have now, I bet we could do that. And so there are real things that can already help to increase people's health span. And if you increase people's health span, you ultimately improve productivity and GDP and output of the economy. So it's in the government's interest to want to keep their population healthy. So they should be investing in that. But unfortunately, the pharmaceutical model has dominated. And so it's been focused on reactive medicine and not preventative and health span. And I'm not ignoring the lifestyle stuff, but the reality is our environment is set up in such a way, it is really hard to be healthy. And I think most people know what to do to be healthy. So then we have to think about, okay, if we can't get everyone to have sustained behavior change, how can we reverse some of the damage that people are doing? And that's exactly what regenerative medicine is all about.
And where would you put GLP-1s in this framework? That's one that the government is starting to get behind. So does GLP-1s belong in your universe?
Yes, very much so. I love them. Not so much the first generation, like semaglutide or Ozempic. Trizepatide, the second generation is okay, but the third generation, retatrutide, that's a great one because that improves insulin sensitivity and your body's ability to process sugar and actually has positive cellular effects. And it doesn't have a huge appetite suppressant effect. And so it's actually improving your body's metabolic machinery, so to speak. If you can improve people's metabolic health, that by far is the biggest impact you can do for society. And again, exercising and eating well is the way to do that, but most people aren't going to do that. And if we have a hack, which is a GLP-1, I think it should just be covered by the government and every single person who has metabolic disease should be on it. I think that would have a huge impact on society. And it's already starting to, but as the government gets behind it and as it's available more widely, then I think that'll be big. I do have a peptide company. We're launching a manufacturing company. It's going to be the first publicly traded peptide company. And the reason I co-founded that company is because I really believe that peptides should be accessible to everyone on the planet.
Can you share the name of that?
Yeah, it's called Vesalius Longevity Labs. We'll have all the peptides, like the healing and regenerative peptides, peptides for fat loss, peptides for brain health, skin health. There's so many different peptides out there now. But the good thing is we have a telemedicine network. So in the US, you can book an appointment with a doctor and then they can do a quick consultation and then they can prescribe you the peptide protocol. And the compounding pharmacy will have those available.
And are there any safety issues there?
Yeah, that's why we're doing our own peptide company, because the problem is the quality for a lot of the manufacturers, they're tainted or they have other things. And we have a European manufacturer that we're working with, and then we make sure we do third-party testing for each batch to just ensure high quality that way. And we have some cool technology too. We have something called peptide pens for different peptides. So for example, like BPC 157, which is like the Wolverine peptide, instead of having to mix them in the vials, and then we're also going to have peptide patches you can just wear on your arm and you don't have to inject yourself.
This is fascinating. It brings to mind that I think consumers or patients need to dust off their biology to really understand all this going on and all the opportunities they have to age well.
Yeah, I think it's about empowering people to feel like they can take control of their own health. And that's what I try to do. And that's why I try to simplify these concepts.
And just to close the conversation out, listeners always want to hear from experts like you. What longevity practices do you find the most meaningful?
So I would say this subtractive medicine, I've really found that to be impactful for myself because I personally had a lot of microplastics and heavy metals, and I had so much stuff come out of my blood that I was shocked. I did something called functional genomics, which is like figuring out your own genetic mutation. I have these genetic mutations, so my liver doesn't detoxify well. So I'm genetically prone to build up toxins more so than most people. So for me, it's even more important to do. But I think with the pollution, with pesticides, with forever chemicals like microplastics that just stay in your body, this is so important. I would say that's one of the most important things. It should be a public health thing that's just covered by the government, that we're not there yet, but maybe one day. But one of those things, I think if you can afford to do it, it's called Clarify, which is right now it's only in the UK, but we're going to have it in our clinic in Cabo. They're going to have FDA approval by end of the year and Health Canada approval by next year. So it'll be widely available in the next year or so. But right now it's only in UK, and we'll have it in Cabo and Dubai as well.
How much does it cost?
It ranges from 5,000 to 10,000.
Okay. Hopefully that goes down. Any other ones that you'd cite that are critical to your longevity?
It goes without saying, I guess, but high resistance training, meaning you're out of breath, you're really pushing yourself, you're doing intense reps, and doing short bursts of high intensity exercise is going to be way more impactful than doing long duration, low intensity for longevity and health. and preserving that muscle, which is why I recommend everyone to have a health coach or a personal trainer or do at least a one-time consultation so they can design you a program.
Gotcha. And last question, we find a lot of people getting really obsessed with their longevity and not living life. Brian Johnson is one example with his 8:30 bedtime and so on. So the question is, how do you balance the pursuit of longevity with the desire to enjoy life?
Yeah, unfortunately, your quality of relationships suffers, right? Happiness and being at peace is ultimately what's going to be most important for longevity and health. Mm-hmm. And whatever brings you that peace is what you should strive towards. And I think for most people, having high quality relationships with their friends and families, it's known to be one of the best predictors of being happy. So for me, I try to focus on spending time with my family and creating a life so I have freedom to do what I want when I want, because ultimately having the option to choose what you want to spend your time doing is really the most important thing.
Dr. Khan, thank you so much for pulling up a chair to the Wellness Roundtable today. For people who want to follow you, find you, where should they go?
Instagram is probably where I'm the most active at dr.akhan, Khan. I am starting to use Twitter now as Dr. Akhan official.
Okay, awesome. And your website is eterna.com.
Eterna.health, actually.
Awesome. Thank you for your amazing work. Such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Now we turn to the Global Wellness Institute's Vice President of Research and Forecasting, Beth McGroarty, for some insight and commentary on what we just learned. Beth, welcome back to the Wellness Roundtable.
Thanks so much for having me again.
Today, I'm excited to get your thoughts on some of the topics that Dr. Adeel Khan and I discussed. Dr. Khan spoke about regenerative medicine as a coming wave, stem cells, gene therapy, tissue engineering. And I'm wondering, from your trend forecasting seat, do you think the wellness industry is ready for this level of science, or are they going to be playing catch up for a long time?
I mean, I think there's a massive culture and knowledge gap between the super complex things that are happening in the halls of biotech and the traditional wellness world of yoga and meditation. But we have the third genre, the booming medical wellness longevity clinics, the resorts. And this is where most regenerative medicine will actually first take place and play out, as it doesn't have FDA approval and is also not subject, therefore, to regulations. So some medical wellness resorts like Shaw Wellness are already doing stem cell injections. Clinique La Prairie is offering immunocellular stimulation. Resorts that were once known for like beachy fun, like Four Seasons Maui, or for ancient approaches like Ayurveda, like Suniva Fushi in the Maldives, they now offer stem cell treatment. So Suniva Fushi offers, quote, prolozone regenerative medicine injections and is the only stem cell center in the Maldives. So I do think more old school wellness businesses need to get more literate quickly in biology and what biotech is doing. And it's very hard work. I also think biotech and medicine need to get more knowledgeable about the value of wellness approaches and how they're actually part of regenerative medicine.
Yeah, it's an interesting moment where both industries have so much to learn from each other. So Beth, how do you think this happens? How do wellness businesses as well as wellness consumers get more literate in biology and biotech? The businesses and practitioners need to deliver the care in a really thoughtful, high caliber way. And then consumers need to be really, really careful because it is a little bit of a wild west out there. And there are doctors like Adeel Khan who are practicing this at the highest level, but then there's a lot of people that are not, right?
Yeah, there's good stem cell clinics and not good stem cell clinics. I think you have to read reviews. I think you have to read articles. You know, you have to look at the profile of the people that are the medical board at this place. I just think basics like that are more important than ever. You know, testimonials and reading what the media says about what these places are doing. It is a wild west. I mean, you can go to a stem cell clinic in Latin America that you're kind of like winging it, and you can go to some place like her organization and feel they're doing it at the highest level. And there are complications that come with stem cell therapy. So
yeah, and we got into a lot of interesting things around whether it's your own stem cells or stem cells from umbilical cords. But I think if someone is thinking about this, they need to go really deep and figure out what makes sense. So clearly there's a lot of excitement around stem cells, and states like Montana and Florida are really opening their doors to these kinds of businesses and clinics. And as you've researched, there's a lot of unregulated clinics and a lot of hype in this area. How do you think the wellness world ideally should navigate this next generation toolkit?
Yeah, and there's an interesting article recently in Men's Health about this boom in unregulated stem cell clinics, noting the explosion. I mean, if there were just a dozen a few years ago, now there's about 100. I really can't weigh in with any medical authority about the efficacy and future of stem cell therapy, whether it's more hope or more hype, but it's appealing generally and maybe especially in the wellness space because stem cell therapy is often grounded in the idea of the natural. In other words, it's a therapy that kickstarts your body's own healing processes. So your body is regenerating what went wrong in the first place. It's sort of an appealing paradigm, even though you're extracting and processing and putting cells back into your body, which is not a natural procedure. But there's science behind stem cells for orthopedic conditions within sports medicine. But clinics are marketing it for autism and Alzheimer's disease. You know, the old cliche, more studies needed, applies here in an intense way. The FDA has approved stem cell therapy for a handful of conditions, some genetic disorders, some cancers, but they basically shut the field down because of the selling of unproven therapies. You know, the wellness world, as I said, Four Seasons getting into stem cells, they have to be aware of the safety issues because there could be complications. Most regenerative medicine clinics are not tracked. They're not regulated, though it varies by country. So the lack of regulation makes it an easier business proposition, but a harder ethical and health decision.
Yeah. Is there any analogy from years past in the wellness industry of navigating these kind of new technologies? Is there anything we can look back to?
You know, I mean, the kind of diagnostics that are now being done may not have been normalized in the way that they are now. But I think this new space of the medical wellness longevity clinic is a complicated space because they're not under the same regulations that medicine and health insurance reimbursed treatments and procedures are. On the other hand, the lack of regulation and tracking about how these clinics are performing, whether they're doing it right or wrong, leaves it open to danger.
Yeah, totally. In terms of where you think the consumer's appetite is, like, what is your take on whether people want optimization or restoration? You're hinting at, yes, this very appealing idea of getting like a biological software upgrade. What do you think people are looking for? Do they want to feel younger or do they want to be redesigned?
That is a very interesting question. I think that wanting to be radically redesigned is still a minority position, but a growing consumer desire from a percentage. More people are willing to go, as we know, to nth degree extremes to optimize their health. In fact, one of our trends this year was called augmented biology, and it was all about this. It was about how advancements in health tech and genetic engineering are going to mean a new future where the body and the machine is fused in a way that used to seem like science fiction. So there will be more solutions aimed at helping people reach superhuman neural, physiological, and psychological states. So we see the performance enhancing brain computer interfaces like Neuralink or Neurable smart headphones. There's a whole new wave of wearable robotics with exoskeletons that's called augmented mobility, like Mogo's trousers. So these are trousers that provide a 40% boost to your leg muscle strength so you can move across a glacier or to help athletes endure superhuman exertion. So you're seeing a marriage of machine and technology and the human body to go places that people have never gone before. You know, some skepticism needed. I just read an interesting article by Alex Harding, a doctor at Massachusetts General, who is like fundamentally questioning this metaphor that the human body can be upgraded like software. He questions the idea that if you diligently optimize all bodily inputs, that you can, quote, reprogram your body to avoid diseases and live untold years. He said the human organism is simply far too complex and unpredictable for that level of software control, and that chance plays such a huge role in human health. So he pointed to the trend of people using continuous glucose monitors to constantly optimize your glucose levels for longevity. And he pointed to the fact that the study suggests that our body's glucose response to food is so inconsistent that it can't produce informative results. So a recent study fed participants identical meals a week apart in a highly controlled hospital environment. And the glucose measurements from that individual looked no more similar from week to week than when they ate a completely different meal. So when I think about redesigning and the openness to radically redesign, kind of bolt on the machine onto the body, the beauty world has already normalized,
Right.
quote unquote, radical human redesigning. I mean, you can buy new hair, a new face, new body parts, drugs for weight loss. I mean, people will go very far for things that work. And I do think beauty has already proven that, and redesigning your brain and body for longevity will, I think, likely be more normalized.
Yeah, no doubt it's going to be a fascinating 5 years ahead. I mean, the pace of change is extraordinary. Beth, thank you so much for your insights today. It's always so great to connect after these episodes, and we'll be back soon with more conversations on the Wellness Roundtable. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Wellness Roundtable. This podcast was produced by Emily Roberts and Ali Alkiza of Over Lunch. Music was provided by Mindstream. And a very special thank you to Susie Ellis, Nancy Davis, and the entire Global Wellness Institute team. As we wrap, it's important to remember that while this podcast is filled with valuable insights about the latest longevity science and innovations, it is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Our conversations are designed to inform and inspire, but should not replace the personalized guidance of your healthcare providers. If today's episode sparked your interest, please subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and share it with friends. To learn more about the Global Wellness Institute, please visit our website, globalwellnessinstitute.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.